right, so with Councillor Stephen now in the room, I can confirm we do indeed have quorum. And so with that, I'm going to pass it off to to the chair. Just one quick moment though for members of that are participating, that are going to be delegating this afternoon in chamber. When it's time for your delegation, if you could kindly come up to the lectern right there, and you should have your PowerPoint right in front of you, and you'll be good to go from there. All right. With all that out of the way, very happy to turn it over to you, Mr. Chair, to get the meeting started.
I'll call the meeting to order at 6:03. Can I get an approval of the agenda? Moved by Paul, seconded by... Oh,
yeah. You have to go right.
Moved by Councillor Straves and seconded by Councillor Tozo. All in favor? Approved. Can I get a confirmation of the minutes? Moved by Councillor Shaves, seconded by Councillor Stephen. All in favor? It passes. So, can I get any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Seeing as none, we'll move on to delegations. First delegation is from Robert Pye from Watershed Canada. He will present to speak to the committee regarding a shoreline naturalization. The delegation has a maximum of 5 minutes to speak. Yeah, you may begin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the City of Kingston for the opportunity to provide this delegation. My name is Robert Pye. I'm with Watersheds Canada. We are a national charity that's been working very hard for the last 20 years to protect shorelands on lakes and rivers across Canada. We are based out of Perth, but our work extends nationwide. And City of Kingston is a special place for me. I'm proud to say that I think that personally Kingston is a global envy for its freshwater opportunities, particularly its fishing and its paddleboarding and sailing. And the City of Kingston has over 250 kilometers of urban and rural shoreline. And Watersheds Canada was recently pleased to learn that your Parks and Shoreline team have worked very hard to preserve the nature on city-owned waterfront properties. So in the past 20 years, Watersheds Canada certainly had an impact on over 120 lakes with the planting of 100,000 native species. We've restored 200,000 meters square of shorelands, and we've also completed 22 fish habitat projects. And I'm here today to simply share our passion for shorelands and provide an educational opportunity. Next slide, please. Watersheds Canada looks at waterfront property as a whole. We use the term shoreland over shoreline because this term encompasses a lot more than where land and water meet. The beauty, health, and enjoyment of water comes from what happens on the shoreland. And native plants, as you see in what we call the riparian zone, or what I prefer to call the ribbon of life, those native plants are certainly helping to stabilize the soil. And when plants are removed, the exposed soil is vulnerable to erosion from waves, and Kingston certainly knows all about waves, boat wakes, and water runoff. This will only increase with climate change and increase in extreme storm events, which Kingston has certainly had your share of storms. Next slide, please. Canada's freshwater is experiencing immense development pressures, and the health of our lakes is rapidly declining. The way we once viewed and developed waterfront properties is changing, and it's expediting the degradation of our shorelands in unprecedented ways. Algae blooms, loss of biodiversity, and poor climate resiliency, such as flooding and erosion, are just some of the impacts. And in this picture, you'll see an example of a property with what we call a hardened shoreline or a gray shoreline compared to a green shoreline, a naturalized shoreline. And of the 45,000 individual waterfront properties we have assessed through our Love Your Lake program, only 22% met the minimum requirement for sustaining lake health. Next slide, please. This is one of my favorite properties that participated in our program called the Natural Edge. This is the same property, different season, and it's only 3 years apart. And you can really tell the incredible change in just 3 years. The landowner's alternative to preventing this property from losing its value through erosion was to install riprap, which costs approximately $300 per linear foot. So for 100 feet of shoreline, that would have cost about $30,000. A shoreline planted, however, with native species costs on average $2,000 from start to finish. So not only is it more cost effective, but it's benefiting the ecosystem and local wildlife. And speaking of wildlife, next slide, please. Shorelines are the most ecologically productive places on Earth. In fact, 90% of all aquatic life is born, raised, and fed in the first 10 to 15 meters from shore, and 70% of land-based wildlife needs a natural shoreline to survive. So without a natural shore, many species would just simply struggle to survive. And in closing, I just want to commend the City of Kingston for its efforts to preserve nature on city-owned waterfront. Obviously, there's more waterfront in the City of Kingston that's actually privately owned, and Watersheds Canada is pleased to introduce ourselves. And if there's an opportunity
30
to
seconds.
share with your residents, please let us know. Thank you very much.
Do we have any questions from the committee? No? Seeing as none? Oh,
Hi, Councillor. Through you, Mr. Chair. So, as per the procedure bylaw, only members that are of a standing committee can ask questions during a delegation. However, if the membership of the committee would like to waive the procedure bylaw, we can certainly do that, put that on the floor, and then we can get your question right started. So, there is wording. So, Mr. Chair, through you.
do I have to read this?
Yes, please.
So, if a non-committee member wants to speak to a delegation, as per the procedure bylaw, section 12.18, only members of the committee may speak to a delegation. To permit a non-member to speak to a delegation, we require a motion on the floor to waive the procedure bylaw to allow them to speak. Do I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Tozo and seconded by Councillor Stevens, that clause 12.18 of the City of Kingston Procedural Bylaw 2021-41 be waived to allow Councillor Osanik to speak to the delegation. You have
Thank
the
you very
floor.
much, members of the committee, and through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much, Mr. Pye, for coming and speaking to us today about naturalized shorelines. I just have two questions, and the first question is, we definitely acknowledge that most of the shoreline around Kingston is on private land. Do you know of any city that has been successful working with their members, right? Like their residents in the city to try to, naturalize the shorelines? Or like, how does it come to be with somebody who has a waterfront house and wants to naturalize the shoreline?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to answer the question, if I may. I appreciate the question from Councillor Osanik, and it's a great question. And Watersheds Canada is aware of just recently, as a matter of fact, the County of Haliburton that has put in place a shoreline preservation bylaw. And Lake of Bays is another good example of a municipality that's taking future forward measures to look after shoreline protection and encouraging through either site plan control or through a bylaw, looking for opportunities to take up Watersheds Canada's advice to try to preserve about 75% of the shore land. And our organization is by no means anti-development. We support opportunities to enjoy the property for a dock and a sitting area and so on, but we do believe, and we're able to successfully demonstrate that a property can have up to 75% naturalized shoreline. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And for you, Mr. Chair, again, I know that when we had the flooding in 2017, and then it was also bad in 2019, some money came up from the federal government. And so the city right away went to, I don't know, try to stabilize the city-owned portions of our shoreline in many places, and they did use, well, I think riprap is riprap where you just put in the big rocks, or is riprap where you also put the big rocks in those metal cages? We use the big rocks, and I know that that's really bad in terms of turtles, right? Like they can't navigate the big rocks on the shoreline. And I just wondered if you could just speak to riprap for a bit and why that's bad to use.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to answer the question, if I may, that's a great question. And the riprap is a reality, probably for the city of Kingston, unlike other communities, because of the level and severity of wave action that you have there on the shoreline. The riprap is a gray material, a cement, and the other product or the other approach is gabion nets or gabion baskets. And Watersheds Canada acknowledges that some properties will need those kind of man-made structures, but we can certainly find opportunities to work within it or directly behind it. So for riprap, for example, quite often properties have that, and we've had many projects where we've actually integrated natural vegetation within that riprap or just directly behind it. So there is a balance, and City of Kingston, we tend to think about the waterfront, the Great Lakes waterfront, but City of Kingston also has those rural lakes, those back-end lakes, and obviously there's more opportunities there, but the City of Kingston itself, right at your waterfront, really needs to deal with the realities of intense wave action.
Thank you very much, and those are my questions. Thanks very much for the committee for letting me ask those questions. Thanks.
Thank you. So now moving on to 5B, Patricia Collins will present to speak to the committee regarding the School Streets Program Extension and Playbook Report. You have a maximum of 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
So my name is Patricia, sorry. My name is Patricia Collins. I'm an associate professor at Queen's University, and I'm here to talk to you today about advancing school streets in Kingston and beyond. So the reason I'm here today is to share an opportunity for funding through the Healthy Canadians and Communities Fund, which is offered through the Public Health Agency of Canada. The HCCF, for short, supports interventions that prevent chronic disease and focus on priority populations who face health inequalities. And there are 3 objectives of this fund: to invest in interventions that address health inequalities, to encourage multi-sectoral participation in chronic disease prevention, and to uncover new ways to address risk factors for chronic disease. There are a number of activities that are eligible for funding through this particular funding opportunity, including engaging priority populations, strengthening relationships between partners, delivering and evaluating interventions, and sharing knowledge through lessons learned. There's up to $3 million available for funding for applicants, but the funding does need to be matched by partners. The deadline is quickly approaching at June 20th, 2023, and funds would flow as early as spring 2024. So the proposal that I'm part of is called National Active School Streets Initiative, and just by way of overview of the initiative, for those of you who may not be familiar, school streets involve closing a section of the street adjacent to a school at the start and the end of the school day to prioritize safe, active travel conditions for children. So I'm part of a large team that's already been piloting this approach in Ontario and Quebec. And through our collaborative work and through this application to the HCCF, we propose to expand this evidence-informed approach to build a national movement for active school streets across Canada. We have 4 key objectives: to deepen the impact in pilot communities, so places where it's already been happening, to implement in new communities, to establish a community of practice that would involve sharing knowledge and troubleshooting during the implementation process, and focusing on key priority populations, namely people living on low incomes, racialized communities, and newcomers to Canada. We are proposing 3 participation levels for interested communities. At the aspiring stage, we're looking for communities that haven't yet implemented school streets and they're really just seeking to learn more information. Pilot communities that are at the readiness stage in terms of willingness to pilot out school street interventions, and level up communities, which are places where school streets have already been operating and there's an interest in trying them out at new locations or investigating ways to make existing sites permanent. And level up communities would actually have the opportunity to partner with researchers on the team to intensively evaluate those interventions. In terms of the executive team that I'm a part of, this is sort of the composition. Green Communities Canada is a national non-for-profit that's leading the application and is supported by 880 cities in the Montreal Urban Ecology Centre. And then there are 3 research teams that are associated with the project, led by Kate Froelich at University of Montreal, myself at Queen's, and Mariana Brusoni at UBC. In terms of committed partners at this stage, I've compiled them in this list so you can sort of see which cities have signed up at the different levels of engagement. You can see I've highlighted Kingston in yellow in hopes that we might be able to get commitment from the City of Kingston today. So why should Kingston participate as a level up community? For one, Kingston has become a national leader for school streets. We're the first city in Ontario to run a school street for an entire school year, and the first Canadian city to run 2 full-year school streets. So this is a great opportunity for the City of Kingston to really share lessons learned through the national community of practice. There's also tremendous local level enthusiasm for school streets in terms of the existing sites where school streets have operated, as well as from other locations that are interested in trying it out. And I'm aware that the City of Kingston already has funds earmarked to support school streets. Finally, there are funds for operating interventions, which is a distinction from previous funding opportunities that I've worked with the City of Kingston on, and that funds in those previous awards could not cover operational expenses. And so this is really an opportunity for us to test out school streets at more challenging sites in the City of Kingston. So what would the City of Kingston's involvement look like?
30 seconds.
I would be looking for cash and or in-kind contributions from the city of up to $102,500, and you can see the breakdown there. A partnership commitment for the duration of the project, a willingness to collaborate with school boards and mobilize school communities to support full-year school streets at 2 school sites, and ongoing contributions to the community of practice, as well as collaboration with me to evaluate the school streets in Kingston. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. So do members of the committee have any questions? Okay. You have 5 minutes. You can ask 2 questions. Councillor Tozo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you, and I won't take 5 minutes. I just have a question based on the information that you provide and the data that I've been looking at. I know one of the targets for this is low-income and racialized communities, but they often have challenges, at least in my experience with my district, having volunteers and people having the time to be able to participate in this program. Based on your evidence, have you found that, I know that that's the goal of it, but have you found that those communities have been less receptive or more receptive? Because it tends to rely on at least a body of volunteers who have that time available. I know a lot of poorer parents don't have that time. They're working 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet.
Thank you for your question, and through you, Mr. Chair. That's a really great point, and certainly you're right in that the school streets that have operated in Kingston so far have been taking place in communities where there is a great deal of availability of volunteers to make those operations work. So one of the great opportunities through this fund is to be able to cover operations costs associated with the interventions, and we estimated $50,000 per year, so that if for a full year intervention. So if communities actually needed to hire people to fill those spots, they could do that, and the funding would give participating communities that flexibility to figure out what model works for them. They might not need 100% paid staff. They could have a mix of volunteer and paid staff. There may also be an opportunity for not-for-profit organizations to become involved and take on a leadership role. However, I would say that that's really part of the objective of the research as well, is to figure out how do we make these things work in those more challenging sites. And that's something that we're really expecting all of the communities, especially all the level up and pilot communities, to take on, to really push for making these possible in more challenging locations.
Thank you. And a follow-up question, do you have borne in your data any information on how this has worked with lower income communities? I know I'm familiar with, from our reports, the two ones in Kingston, but I don't know it beyond that. Do you have any other information on that in other jurisdictions?
That's a really good question through you, Mr. Chair. I would say that the City of Mississauga did implement pilot school street initiatives in a low-income community in Mississauga. It was for just 4 or 6 weeks. I can't quite remember the interval of time, so it has been done before. And it's also happened in Montreal, which is my partner for the previous research project. They've operated a school street in a lower income community there as well. So, yeah. So there are precedents for it. Certainly there's probably more examples of school streets that have operated in more affluent communities, but that's really what we're setting out to accomplish in this.
Okay, thank you very much. Very good presentation, and I thank you for your answers.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Shaves.
Thank you. Just following up on Councillor Toza's comments, as you mentioned in your presentation, priority populations are people living in low incomes, racialized communities, and newcomers. Isn't the main focus of this program to secure the safety of the children attending school?
Yes, that's correct.
So should that be prioritizing all schools that be willing to participate, especially those that have a high risk of areas that have a higher track volume that could be at risk?
Yeah, so thank you for your question through you, Mr. Chair. It's really, our identification of those 3 priority groups reflects the Public Health Agency of Canada's requirements in terms of identifying specific priority groups for intervention. And they don't identify children, which would be, to me, an obvious priority group in terms of intervention, but that's not one of the groups on their list. And so we can certainly make the argument that over and above these other groups that they've identified, children are clearly a priority population that warrant this kind of intervention. But it's not one of the 8 groups that they've listed in the call for applications. And so we are identifying those additional groups. Now, Kingston, certainly compared to some of the other municipalities on the list, have less diversity, and so some municipalities will not necessarily have the same challenges that Kingston might face in terms of implementation in, say, a neighborhood where there's a high percentage of newcomers or racialized populations. But certainly we have no shortage of communities with people living on low income, and I would suspect that would be kind of how we would target our efforts to recruit willing communities.
Okay, because there are issues with
You
student
actually
safety.
asked 2 questions.
The first one wasn't really a question. This is more of a statement. See?
Okay, I got permission.
We do have issues with student safety through a number of our schools within Kingston itself. But I'm just wondering, have you spoken with any of our stakeholders, such as city staff or school boards, and their willingness to participate?
Yes, so I've had extensive conversations with Ian Semple and Matt Cusson about the School Streets program, and you'll hear more about it tonight, I think. We've also been engaged with the Limestone District School Board, and I'm currently working with the Kingston Coalition for Active Transportation, which has been involved in implementing school streets, has been the implementation partner for the school streets to date. And the Boys and Girls Club is also involved as a non-for-profit organization that's assisting with Play Street implementation in, I'm not sure, in the Inner Harbor neighborhood. So we have some experience in the city of Kingston in terms of implementation of these initiatives in lower income communities.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I'm all in favor of increasing school safety.
Thank you. Councillor Stephen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, thank you, Patricia, for your presentation. It's always great to hear about alternative sources of funding. As we know, that is often the limiting factor for all the great things we want to do in our city. So I'm just wondering, it was up there at one point, but I'm wondering what you need from the city, where you're at, and what our committee can do to help for next steps, if there's anything we can do.
Thank you for your question through you, Mr. Chair. So specifically, we're looking for matching funds from our partners. And so we are seeking funding up to $102,500 for our level up communities. And so we need that amount matched or less, right? So we're not asking for more than that. So if the city can only commit 50,000, then that's what the city can commit. There's also the option of committing a certain amount now and then committing more later that we can do as well. It can be cash or in kind, so I would fully expect that most of it would be in kind. In fact, if I just scroll back here, you can see that most of the community's commitments are in kind. And that's really a matter of, enumerating staff time. That would be committed to the to working with me and the school communities to make this work. Yeah.
Okay, so for what's coming up later tonight, we're talking about, I believe it's 35,000 to be continually contributed toward this, or not to end, basically. Are you talking about, if you're talking about up to 102,000, is that something that you are able to work with staff directly on?
Yes, I can work directly with staff on that. I know that, I think, seeing Ian nod. So we've had some initial conversations about kind of where things are at in terms of the pot of money available for school streets. And so my hope is that there's some cash that might still be available to support this moving forward. And then hopefully the rest can be made up through in-kind contributions.
Thank you. Councillor Hassan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. And thank you very much, Patricia, for your great presentation, and good to see you at the podium as well. My question is, during this pilot project or the program, have you heard anything from the other schools when they know that that your school or another school, you have two schools on the pilot project, right? If what they are doing and they show interest that they probably want to be part of it, is any information that somebody approached you from the other schools?
Thank you for your question through you, Mr. Chair. I don't want to identify any specific schools because I wouldn't want to put them on the spot. I would say that in the preparation to get the first School Street launched in Kingston, myself and Roger Healy, who's the chair of the Kingston Coalition for Active Transportation, approached quite a number of schools in Kingston to see if they would be interested in doing this. And I would say we had quite positive conversations with most of them. There was reluctance because it hadn't been done before in Kingston, and so they had no idea what it was going to look like, what, if anything, would be required of staff, and so there was some reluctance at that time to join on. Now that we've seen 2 full-year school streets run successfully in Kingston, I think we are on really good footing to expand this to other sites in the city. Certainly there's no shortage of locations of schools in the city, in all of the boards that suffer from congestion issues around the school site due to parents picking and dropping off their kids. We do need to do some more sort of in-depth site level analysis to figure out whether certain sites would be appropriate for this kind of intervention and how easily we could divert other traffic. But I'm quite confident that we would be able to find suitable sites and, more importantly, willing sites, especially if there are funds available to operate it. And, to date, the school streets that have operated have used the volunteer model, which has worked fine for Winston and Central where they've operated because there is that pool of people who are willing to be involved. But having funds that we can dedicate to operations will certainly take that burden off of school communities to volunteer to make it work.
And Mr. Chair, can I have a question in 2 parts, A, B, and C, or just?
Yeah, if you ask it all at once.
Exhibit A and Exhibit C, B. Yeah, the first part of the question to you again. During that implementation and the program you ran for the school year, what was the action or reaction from the neighborhood when you closed the street for 30 minutes, and how it was helpful for the parents who coming to pick it up and not having congested there, not parking illegally or on the wrong places?
Sorry, did you say what was the reaction from parents?
No, the neighborhood around the school.
The neighborhood.
Yeah.
So that's a really good question. So Winston was the first site where the school street operated starting in September of 2021. And in the beginning, it was quite an extensive operation. It was 350 meters in total, and it was a T. So it ran from Earl Street to Union along Macdonell, that whole length, and then as well from Macdonell to Hill Street. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with that neighborhood, but that's a pretty extensive section.
I'm very much familiar with
You're
it.
familiar, okay. So in the beginning, there was a fair amount of frustration among the residents who weren't immediately adjacent to the school. And so after several weeks, the initiative was significantly reduced to just run from Earl to Hill along Macdonell. And so it went from about 37 dwellings that were impacted to 9. Once that happened, it was really quiet, really smooth sailing. The residents didn't grumble; they were quite content. The residents who were sort of outside of the closed street boundary could come and go and weren't impacted. And so the Winston School Street has really operated quite smoothly, quite effectively. One of the other challenges with the Winston School Street in the beginning was that there was construction happening on Johnson. And so there was also traffic being diverted along Earl that wouldn't normally be. And so that did create a bit more congestion along that corridor. But I know in speaking to residents on Earl Street who live close to the school, they've told me that they haven't noticed any major changes in the level of traffic congestion on their street since the school street was implemented. So there were always people parking along Earl Street, but that's continuing to happen. At Central, I'm going to be surveying residents in the coming weeks. I'm literally going to be dropping off invitations in their mailboxes tomorrow to get their input on the traffic-related considerations with the school street. So I can't really report on that right now. I can provide that information later, yeah.
And the second part of the question is to the staff. If staff can give us...
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. During delegation, staff can't answer questions, sorry.
My apologies. Thank you very much, Patricia, for the presentation. I think it's a great program. It's a great initiative, and definitely it will help a lot of other schools if they get involved to reduce the risk of for the children's safety. And and in my district we have a couple schools that is on high risk as well. So I will probably encourage them to contact with you guys.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'd like to say that I really love this program. I think it's great, and Councillor Hassan had already asked my question, so that's all. Thank you.
Okay, good, all right.
So the next delegation is Daniel Hendry from Limestone District School Board, who will present to speak to the committee regarding the School Streets Program Extension and Playbook Report. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I'm going to start off. My name is Dave Fowler. I'm the Manager of Facility Services for the school board. Dan Henry is our Sustainable Initiatives Coordinator for the school board, and Dan will speak to our experience with this Closed Streets program. Another member of our delegation unfortunately couldn't make it, and her name is Patty Gollagly. She is the Associate Superintendent of Safe and Caring Schools. And just to comment on one of the councillors' comments earlier was we are looking at many ways to improve safety in front of our schools, and the schools pilot program is one of several options we can do. So over to you, Dan, and you can tell about our experience with the Closed Streets program.
For sure. Thanks again, and I'll be as quick as possible. I think I read a bit quicker, or I've written the speech. So I'm here on behalf of Limestone District School Board, as Dave said, and we'd like to extend our heartfelt thanks, first thing, to everyone who's worked tirelessly, literally, to make this School Streets pilot a reality. We'd like to recognize KCAT, which is the Kingston Coalition for Active Transportation, Roger Healy, Patricia Collins, Nico Koning, and the City of Kingston staff and council, along with many other community partners and volunteers who've been instrumental for these groundbreaking pilots. Now, operating in school streets year-round is fairly unprecedented undertaking in Canada, and doing so for several years now has required a tremendous amount of dedication and commitment. The School Streets Playbook, which is attached to, I think, to your package there, which has been developed collaboratively with the City of Kingston and KCAT, goes beyond just the logistics or maybe the why. It really delves into the how, like managing street closures, storage, volunteer management, communication, conflict resolution, and scheduling. It also underscores the why of implementing a school streets, drawing from the academic research and the invaluable experience from other not-for-profit organizations. Now, Now, the playbook you'll see there guides schools and communities considering similar interventions, detailing our collective learnings from the past years from refining these processes. This information is not just useful for existing pilot schools like Winston and Central, but can act as a springboard for other school communities keen to embrace such initiatives and clearly lay out the amount of commitment and process it to ensure a successful school street. As we continue our journey, we remain committed to learning and improving, and this includes considering enhancement to our facilities for better storage of materials and resolving complex matters like volunteer insurance coverage. It appears right now, we've looked in preliminary, that volunteers associated with the school and its functions might be able to be covered under the school's existing insurance, and this is something that we're eager to explore as the school board. Now, the school board, as I said, sincerely appreciates the collective effort. It really took a community to make these initiatives work, and this valuable knowledge is compiled into what you'll see there in the playbook that can guide schools, parent councils, and communities towards successfully implementing and adapting these interventions. We value all the input from members of our community, especially those who interact directly with our students every day. And with that being said, we'd like to share a little bit of feedback from one of the school principals in Winston. When we asked if the School Streets program promotes more walking and biking to school, and this was a principal that kind of came in this year, so she hadn't seen the full 2 years. She'd mentioned that they are in that area fortunate to live in a bicycle-friendly community or neighborhood where most students do use active transportation to school, but the 200 meters of the closed street does offer an opportunity for kids to ride freely for the rest of the ride as they are after they're practicing, on top of practicing traditional road safety. This would likely be the case, whether the initiative was in operation or not. Again, she came halfway through, and that was her perspective. In considering the future, the principal voiced some potential challenges of the School Streets program not operating next year. For example, she said children and families are now used to having the luxury of the closed road down McDonnell. So the program, if it was to be discontinued, education on street safety would be needed. There might also be feelings of disappointment among families that have become accustomed to this initiative. In the winter, when sidewalks and parking lots are not clearly cleared in a timely manner, families often walk in the middle of the road, which might be another cause for concern. They went on to discuss a couple other problems potentially with drop-off zones in the absence of a program, especially with families dedicated to dropping off their students in the now accessible parking lot that is at Winston. The principal stated that the entrance and exit of the parking lot can be extremely busy, making it potentially dangerous for young children crossing over. A safety audit might be something that needed to be done with a possible revision. They also made it clear, and I think we're all here together, that school streets could not follow, could not fall on the responsibility.
You have 30 seconds.
Thank you. Could not fall on the responsibility of the school staff, as there are too many other issues that they're responsible for inside and outside of the community. Despite these challenges, the principal acknowledges the positive aspect of the program. And with that being said, I'm going to really go quick. We recognize that not every school in Limestone, rural, or some specific location in the city will be able to implement a school street. However, this was a recommendation in the school streets from the School Streets Safety Working Group. In closing, we'd like to thank everyone involved in the participation, eagerness to learn, contribution to the playbook. As we move forward with the city and our community partners, including those connected to the Active Pedestrian Safety Committee, we're excited to leverage our hard work, dedicated volunteers, and working groups' recommendations. Thank you.
Do you have any questions from the committee? Councillor Shaves?
Thank you. Thank you for that delegation. Just two questions. I know you had the comments coming from the principal at Winston, but what is your overall opinion of this program, and are there any plans on expanding it within the Limestone District School Board?
So go ahead, Dan, and I'll comment.
Sorry, Mr. Hendry, you are on mute, it appears.
Oh, sorry, that was my hard mute button there. I would say that as for further expansion, before understanding some of the precedent we're setting as well as the staffing, and that's something that we are not able to do. Currently, that's something for expansion, is not something in the immediate future. However, the program itself, both schools enjoyed it, and if we can, as a community, figure out what roles and pieces we can play together, it's definitely something that I think, based upon function of site site, I mean, some sites just won't work. And not just about volunteers, it's about artillery veins or rural schools. And we do also have to consider the full area of limestone. Dave, I'd like you to jump in on that if you could.
Yeah, I think one of the important things is the reason the playbook was created was to identify all the measures needed to run a successful program. And so we'd like to run successful programs. And so if you look at the planning of the within the playbook, it describes all the elements that are required. So even though you may have a school principal or a school community that's very eager to try the program, it simply may not be viable if they don't have all the components. And that was our primary reason for developing this playbook, so that we could make sure they have all the right criteria to have a successful program. So as Dan said, it may not work everywhere, but there are definitely other sites that it could work at. We just want to make it sure it is successful wherever we implement it.
Any other questions? No, seeing as none. Oh, Councillor Hassan, that's right. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Mr. Henry, may I ask you that what kind of help in the past for this pilot project school board has provided, and what kind of help and how the school board is, or how the school board is going to help for this project to be continue? If you have any plan, and also if you can share if as a school, as the board, if you guys have to reach out, some other schools has the most issues with the heavy traffic areas. Like a lot of schools, and I think they are in trouble because of the heavy traffic in those areas.
Yeah, as for help, and Dave, again, you can jump off. But one thing, again, looking into the insurance component, that has been a heavy burden right now for the volunteer groups external to the board. So if there could be a rider from the school board side, as Dr. Collins said, some type of support with making sure if it's from the school community and their volunteers at the school, that is one opportunity for support. The reality is this is kind of, our transportation budget right now in Ontario, most school boards are running a deficit. A lot of that is the yellow buses, but there isn't, provincially funded, as a provincially funded institution, there simply right now isn't an earmark for this type of work. So I think as a bigger community, as we're here tonight and seeing the recommendations from staff as well as Dr. Collins, as we kind of iterate and work together, I think that's where we find the role of function to see how this could be sustained. And yeah, I think the biggest thing, looking at some of the stats that I've helped with developing the playbook, is, we have to really as a whole rethink how our kids get to school, not just from a school board side, but the infrastructure side. I think right now, I believe, and staff could, well, I don't know if I could say this, but I think it was about 40% of students in Kingston are being driven, right? And so my point, I guess, is the school board, and Dave, you can add more to this, being my supervisor, but definitely looking into insurance and some of that component would be one way the school board could help. In the past, right now, it was a project that was initiated at a grassroots level, and that's how it's been kind of come to here. So it wasn't on my personal job description, but it was definitely something I worked actively on this past year, given staff time to make sure that we did consolidate and institutionalize at least the process. Because the other reality is, I find in my experience and running programs like the successful Kingston Transit programs at our sites, is they're transient communities, and different parents want to do different things. And as soon as a student leaves the school, that parent council might change completely, as well as the changing of students, parents, and staff. Principals rotate as well. So that's one of some of the complexities I'd say we deal with when trying to institutionalize or create the stability of a program like this. But I'm very proud of what the community has put together to date, and see where we can make next steps. But Dave, could you have anything else to add there?
Yeah, if I could just finish off, Dan, one of the things that we're challenged with as a school board, as I say, we don't have specific funding for this type of operation, but at the end of the day, it does provide a better school safety in front of the school. So is there something funding in the future? Maybe, we don't know. We currently don't have funding now, so we are relying on the volunteers that are made up to help run this program. Maybe is there funding in the future, but as Dan said, there's a challenge with transportation funding in general. And the one thing we want to promote all over our schools is active transportation. So that's just good for good, healthy living for the kids, teaching them the right things, but get more cars off the street as well. There's for good environmental sustainability. So one of the things, it's a great program that promotes all of that. So we will embrace it as best we can, but we can only staff it for what we have funding for. So that is our challenge. But moving forward, hopefully we can make it successful, and hopefully the playbook is the initial guideline to get the program running at other school sites.
Beside the funding, is that school board can assure that they will be standing behind this program with all those community stakeholders to make sure this program is reached to its maximum success rate?
So I can't speak on behalf of the school board, but I would say it would be our intent to support this as best we can. But if we can't provide funding for certain elements of it, then that would be our challenge.
Well, we have to be respectful, I think, of the fact that, you know, the kindergarten students going into the Winston, for example, which is unprecedented, 2 years straight, they've had that as a normalized behavioral mechanism around that school. That's what it is. That's what they understand. And so I do caution making sure that we take the right steps forward, being mindful of, you know, making sure as a community we have the right pieces in place to ensure success rather than, you know, continued expansion. If we don't have and understand the mechanisms for staffing or even volunteer management in some of these pieces. And I do think the grant that is laid out lays an opportunity for this continued collaboration. But I would, you know, in my experience anyway, or speaking to other superintendents, some of that caution is just to make sure that we're doing it well and also not setting up some of these school sites for, you know, the normalized behavior that just won't be the same when the infrastructure changes back because it can't be voluntarily staffed.
Thank you.
Thank you for your delegation. Now moving on to 5D, which is Joan Bowie from the Williamsville Community Association, will be presenting to speak to the committee regarding the transportation issues in Williamsville. You have 5 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. My name is Annette Burfoot. Joan Bowie and John Grenville are here, so is Rob Fonger. All of us are members of the Williamsville Community Association. And today what I'd like to do is to present you a review of a recent town hall meeting that we had, well attended by estimated 40 residents of Williamsville regarding transportation. This was on April 13th. Just a quick point towards some relevant points from the Kingston Strategic Plan. I'm not going to read these out, and I'm sure you're familiar with these, but these relate to what you're going to hear in terms of this review. We had 4 presentations to begin the town hall meeting from these people, including Dr. Collins, who you heard from earlier. And I'm not going to go into detail about these. I'll just quickly go through, with the help of slides, what was covered in those 4 presentations. What I would really like to focus on are the responses from the public. Most people attending spoke up afterwards. I'd also like to point out the uniqueness of Williamsville. It is the densest district in Kingston, the smallest district in Kingston, and it is the district between most of the traffic that comes chiefly from the west and the north towards downtown. So that makes the transportation throughways through Williamsville remarkable, and they include Princess Street, Brock and Johnson, which you can probably appreciate are main thoroughfares. This and the fact that we have a large population of Queen students that live in the area, and we have an immense development going along on the Williamsville corridor, Princess Street, which is for student residents, speaks to our issues. All right, this is the first presentation from the city, and you may be aware of this. They're doing a study of the Williamsville corridor chiefly, and they talked about the priorities and their hopes for developing this street that is also under development on either side of it. The biggest issue is restricted space. There is not much space left by the developments for wide sidewalks, active transport lanes, bike lanes, and to prioritize public transit routes, et cetera. So that is the biggest challenge, and they explained what they want to do in regards to that. And basically, it's to remove the bike lanes, if you look at the one on the existing view, and then going down to the proposed concept, the bike lanes come out because they say you can't fit everything in. This becomes an issue later on in the presentations. We had a presentation from 2 Queen students who are working with the Williamsville Community Association, and they presented on green streets. They've done some research into them and explained what green streets are, and they gave some wonderful ideas about what can happen on a street, which we are very interested in. And Frontenac has been designated as a green street, not designated, but in planning has been, or policy making has been identified as a potential green street. These are some images that the students presented us with about what can happen. You can see how it slows down traffic, it improves, it answers to many of the presentation, or resonates with many of the presentations you've just heard in trying to biodiversify as much as possible, creating biodiversity corridors. The third presentation by Roger Healy, representing active transportation in Kingston, this is a very telling slide. You can see his little finger he's put in there, and his presentation was chiefly a complaint that although as a city we say we prioritize active transportation, we don't. We tend to prioritize moving cars. And this is, I'm just going to flip through, these are all a sort of list of complaints about how that happens, how policies get put in place and they're not met. And he and others who spoke afterwards were concerned about the removal of bike lanes, which is what's happening on Princess Street. This was his proposal for the possibility of having it all on one street. And then Dr. Collins spoke about quiet streets and school streets, as you've heard some details about the school street part of that. And one of the comments that
30 seconds.
Oh my God, that I remember most from her thing is that if you build it, they will come. In 30 seconds, safety is one of the main concerns for this densely placed district. Speed has to be reduced. Safety, especially around parks and schools, green streets, quiet streets, safety zones, and we definitely need a comprehensive plan for transportation in this particular neighborhood, especially given that we're looking at about 5,000 new students coming into the area, given the development along Princess Street, and we're having more pressures to move them north and south, not where most of the transit routes are. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you have any questions from the committee? Councillor Tozo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. So you mentioned bit of feedback there, sorry. Still learning how to use these things. You mentioned child safety as an issue. Have there been any accidents or any major concerns when it comes to child safety around schools or daycares or anything related to that?
So I was part of a petition for Brock and Johnson, and we did ask for accident reports because I live near Brock, so I see them. By my count, in the last year and a half, there have been 3 serious accidents on Brock, and I'm going to relate this to schooling in just a second. One of them was fatal, but I have not got the information about how many accidents there are. The reason this relates to schools is because on one side of Brock and Johnson is the Winston Churchill School, which is now a catchment school for the area that extends to the other side of that corridor. And on the other side of those 2 main streets is Rideau School, which is the French immersion, all French immersion school now, which attracts, again, students from all over the city, but also from the other side of that major corridor. So we have students every day, young students, these are both elementary schools, crossing those corridors. I am praying that we are not going to see a child hit.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Thanks for the presentation. I have one question. What would be the one, if you had to pick one priority from everything that you've had here, what would be the one thing that stands up the most, that would be the biggest priority for you?
The one thing that would affect all the issues immediately is the reduction of speed throughout the district.
Thank you. No more questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
So moving on to briefings, and there are none. So now, number 7 is business, which is, number A is Utilities Kingston Asset Management Policy, and the report of the President and CEO of Utilities Kingston. Can I have staff introduce the item?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So right now, we're bringing in our revised asset management policy for approval ultimately by council and for the committee to recommend to council to approve the policy. So this policy was initially approved by council in August 7th of 2018. And we have attached it as a revised one based on the OREG 58817 and based on best management practices. Right now, this policy excludes street lights and traffic lights, in which the asset management is now being led by the City of Kingston. So our recommendation is that the committee recommend to council that the revised asset management policy that is attached as Exhibit A be approved as it relates to the city-owned assets managed by Utilities Kingston. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the committee? Councillor Shaves?
You know what's coming. Don't look at me that way. I only have one question. I just want to ensure that the maintenance and of the street lights and traffic lights will be maintained the same quality it has been up to date.
So Utilities Kingston will continue to operate and maintain the street lights and traffic lights as we do at the moment under the direction of the city.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Seeing as none, can I look for a mover and, oh, is there another part that I'm missing? Oh, is there any members of the public wishing to speak?
I currently see no members of the public either in Zoom or in person. Thank you.
Is there another part?
Yeah, that's just someone actually spelled, not as
Now I'm looking for a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Tozo, seconded by Councillor Shaves. All in favor? And that passes. Okay. They have to read on this. So now number B is School Streets Program Extension and Playbook, the report of the Commissioner and Transportation and Public Works. So can I have staff introduce the item, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think as some of the delegations have provided tonight, this report provides an update on the School Streets program, a program that's been running for multiple years, where the city is a partner in sort of supporting those pieces. There is a playbook that's included that's designed to share the information about how those programs have been running in Kingston to residents, community groups, parent groups, and others that may be interested in looking at that approach. But it also includes some practical recommendations relative to funding for the next school year in relation to the way the city is supporting that and opportunities that exist to participate in a grant proposal. So I'm happy to take any questions. Joining me tonight is Matt Cusson, who's the Manager of Policy and Programs for Transportation as well, whose team is instrumental in sort of managing the city side of those programs.
Councillor Hassan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. My question was the part of the question I asked Patricia. What was your say on the program is run through? Do you hear any comments from the public, from the citizens that?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So thank you for the question, Councillor. I would say early on in the program, we did hear some both positive and negative feedback in terms of the change when it was first introduced. As Dr. Collins alluded to in her presentation, when Winston Churchill first introduced their school street, the scope of the school street was relatively large. It was 3 blocks. And so the adjustment, or I would say following the adjustment to the school frontage, I would say that we didn't hear any significant concerns following that. Any school change implementation is a change for the community, and we certainly do receive questions and concerns and feedback to that. And we work with and have worked with KCAT to make adjustments as needed and to educate residents in advance as well. KCAT has gone to significant lengths to ensure that residents in the surrounding and directly affected areas were aware and educated of the purpose for the school street, which I think went a long way as well.
And through your, or with your expertise on it, if council or the committee go ahead with this program and approve that one, you think that will be really a positive impact on the issues we have about the traffic around the school areas?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question, Councillor. Yes, so I think this program is one of the tools or programs that the city is working, includes as part of our broader school safety programs. So there's been a lot of work recently with our school safety partners, with the school boards, Tri-Board Transportation, Kingston Police, Public Health, and others in the community around school safety measures that can be put in place. So this is one of those tools, in combination or alone, that can be used to enhance school safety. So and what we have learned in the operation of the program, as Mr. Cusson sort of outlined, is there are, each site is unique. There may be concerns that need to be addressed at each site. A lot of these pieces can be understood and mitigated through planning and understanding how the program would operate. But when done in the right way, it can provide a tool that enhances safety, at locations where it can work.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, you can ask you have 5 minutes to speak, so you can ask as many questions as you can fit in 5 minutes.
So what I'm seeing in this program is it can be a great help, especially the issues I hear from my own district, the couple of schools we have. When I'm picturing those issues that came to me and aligned with this program, it's very helpful. And I think that can be a great program. The last question is, if this program is go through, and is we going to go back to start doing again, is that as a city we will be able to send this information or a playbook to all the schools? Okay, this is the program going on, and if all the issues you have, this will help you to reduce those and come to create more safety for the children and the parents who are coming through. Contact with this program, or if you're willing to try this program, contact the city or the group is doing that one.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for the question. Yes, so that is certainly the intent with this report tonight and the exhibit that is attached. The approach to develop the playbook was really to take the learnings from the existing school streets that we do have in the city and ensure that they're encapsulated in a way that interested school communities who want to pilot or try a school street have the resources and information to be able to do so. So certainly we will work with our local school board partners to ensure that this resource is made available, and we'll certainly post that information on the city's website as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Stephen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. First thing, well done. This is incredible leadership for Kingston. I could not be more proud of all of you, so well done. I'm hopeful that, with this program, yes, we're going to see more kids being active, whether it's walking or biking and families together, but I'm also hopeful that this might almost make it just that little bit more difficult for people to drive their kid to the front door. And so maybe we'll see an increase in bus service too for the students who use it. I know in my district that's an issue. People drive their kids when there is bus service available. So I'm hopeful we'll have some other spillover effects there. I wanted to ask, so the question earlier about funding and in-kind support, now there's a part of the recommendation that makes a lot more sense to me. It says 20,000 of the existing funding and provide in-kind support. I was wondering if there's something you could tell us about that, please.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So, yes. So the last year, Council approved an envelope of $50,000 for this school year to be available for KCAT, the Kingston Coalition of Active Transportation, to operate school streets in the locations where it could be operated, with a variety of sort of parameters about that. So there's a sunset clause that's related to that funding. Of the $50,000 that was made available, approximately $15,000 was sort of utilized through the program to purchase equipment and support it in a variety of ways. So we have an envelope, an existing envelope of funding that is available. And given the interest and success of the program, there is certainly a recommendation from staff that funding be available such that the programs could continue. And I might just expand then. There was a question and there was some discussion about equity that came up as well. And so that is part of what was factored into the discussion, or the internal discussions as it related to the funding. So there is funding that's available, but there is an opportunity that was presented to the city for a grant opportunity that would provide additional funding, but also provide funding related to operational support, which is something that we're not able to provide right now. So the funding that continued, the approved funding that is available, the $35,000, a portion of which can be directed towards supporting the grant in the initial phase, plus in-kind support, but also ensuring that portions of funds are still available for other community groups to come forward in the next school year to operate and to initialize a school street in their area. So we're looking at taking the funding that already exists and trying to, one, support the grant so that there could be matching funds and that could be directed towards areas where there may not be as much opportunity for a school street to become available. And two, the funding still is available to the general community for opportunities that would arise at various schools or school street locations. So that's the recommendation of staff for as it relates to the existing funding. That funding would be as it's written in the report, that funding would then be available until it was exhausted.
Thank you. So if I understood what you were saying, the 20,000 is toward the grant matching, and then the 15K is for the community use to keep the program going and support others who want to do it, right? Okay, great, thank you. You mentioned equity, which I so appreciate, and I just noticed there were two partners that were noticeably absent for me, and I just wanted to encourage you folks to reach out to them. I totally see that this will be posted and shared and anyone can access it, which is amazing. I really am glad to see, of course, Limestone District School Board has been a full participant. Algonquin Lakeshore Catholic District School Board, I noticed, has been consulted. I'm wondering about CEPEO and CECCE. And I just wanted to mention them. My own children attend one of those. And I just think, we've had that Franco-Ontarien thing brought to our attention, and I just wanted to take this opportunity to say, please do reach out to them. And if you need any help, talk to Councillor Chinani, because he speaks French really well.
Can I just respond to that, Mr. Chair? Is that okay? Thank you for that question. I think your point or question is well taken around the other school board So we have been school boards. We have been working with the Limestone School Board most closely just because those were the locations where they were operating. And we work with the Algonquin Catholic District School Board, Lakeshore Catholic District School Board, as part, and the Limestone School Board as part of our school safety panel. So the other two boards were invited to participate as part of the school safety working group, have yet to participate. However, that doesn't mean that they aren't eligible for the School Streets program and the funding as it relates to those pieces. So we certainly would share it also with those school boards and those communities so that they were aware of it.
Thank you, Councillor Tozo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. So I did a quick mental math in my head of the places in my district that this would be eligible for. And I think part of my question comes down to eligible criteria, because it seems to be, it's a great idea, but it seems to actually be fairly narrow when we take a look at the kinds of schools that would be appropriate for this. Do you have a ballpark figure of what kind of schools or how many schools in Kingston would likely be eligible for this based on the criteria?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the question. That's a great question. I wouldn't say that we have a specific number in mind, but I would affirm your observation that there are certainly challenges, or I would say constraints in terms of where school streets may be successful and where they may be more challenged. Certainly in along frontages that lend themselves to being closed, i.e., being on a local road certainly is more feasible typically. We have to consider things like transit operation and other needs through those corridors. So certainly it is a site-specific review, and that was part of the playbook development to ensure that that information is available early on and considered early on, so that schools and interested school communities can understand where a school street may be more successful.
Thank you. And a follow-up question. I noted somebody mentioned in an earlier report that around Central it was larger and then was narrowed down as they learned lessons of it. Was that correct? Or Winston?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that was at Winston Churchill Public School.
Were there any other operational lessons along the way you learned that with these two pilots?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think there certainly were lessons along the way. School Streets is a very new topic and initiative, certainly in a Canadian context. I think most of the lessons that we've learned have been relatively minor in terms of materials and ensuring the operations are kind of sufficient in terms of the parking lot, for instance, at Winston Churchill, ensuring that there were volunteers that were mid-block, not just kind of at the end of each road, to ensure that that vehicle access was being maintained in a safe way. The materials and the storage of materials, has been kind of a learning process as well. And I think, as the delegation and certainly in our communications with KCAT and the operators at Central, one of the challenges has been around just ensuring that there are enough volunteers to run the program each day. I think that's been one of the biggest challenges and continues to be. And we certainly recognize all of the hours and support that the volunteers have put in over the past 2 years in that regard.
Thank you. Another question. I got a lot of questions today. Another question I have. I noticed in the report when I was looking for sort of data or information to sort of see what lessons we could take away. Have you done any survey data or any other research on the impact that these school communities had in active transportation? Were there more reports of people walking? From the other cases, it looked like it was self-reported from parents, like they just reported it. I felt like we were biking more. It felt like it. Was there any actual objective, non-anecdotal data that we got from this, or was it mostly just this principal felt it went well? I'm curious.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not aware of specific research or objective research that has been done for the two school streets in Kingston, or even necessarily, kind of going beyond survey work in the context of Ontario or Canada, because it is such a new initiative. I know, in hearing Dr. Collins' presentation today, that's certainly part of, I think, some of the work that would go forward if we were successful in the grant funding opportunity to more clearly, objectify some of those results.
Yeah, thank you. And this isn't to, I know it's a pilot, but I'm always looking for like, what data can we pull? Because I'm a data guy. Another question. Got my eye on you, Councillor Chinani. I left it on too long. Okay. Actually, I think that's all my questions. Thank you very much. Very thorough, good report. I know, yeah. Don't tempt me with a good time, Councillor Shaves. No, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for the report. I appreciate the questions. And again, I support what this is about. I'm looking forward to it potentially being expanded. Oh, sorry. Final question. Are there any new schools that are interested right now that were not in the report that are interested in being onboarded in the next school year? Or is that privileged information?
Through you, Mr. Chair. We're not aware of specific schools that have reached out. I think certainly, part of the dissemination of this playbook, I would anticipate, some school communities in having a better understanding of how school streets works. I would anticipate that we may receive some requests, but to date, we're not aware of any specific schools that have reached out. And just to add one thing to your previous question, I would say that school streets, from a staff perspective, do go a long way in terms of a general reprioritization of active travel in front of the school. So that's certainly a recognition from staff that is captured in surveys and in other ways, but and in hopefully a translation to more students that are walking to school. But it is certainly as well a visible reprioritization in front of the school as well.
Okay, thank you. And for real this time, I'm done. Thank you.
You sure?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
All right, Councillor Shaves.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll start talking before someone else takes over. I'd like to thank staff for the playbook. It's a very good tool, I think, for any schools who may think about joining the program. If I heard correctly, you mentioned Canadian initiative. Does that mean there's other countries that have started this program before we have?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's correct, Councillor. There are other countries that certainly have implemented school streets, largely in Europe, from what we're aware of, specifically the United Kingdom, but I believe others as well.
Did we base our program on their model? Do you know?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I would say that as part of some of the work that KCAT and Dr. Collins had put forward and come forward to us with, I don't want to speak for them, but would suggest that there likely were some learnings or, the general approach or concept would have taken some learnings from other areas. At that time, I believe there had been one or two other school streets that had operated in Canada. One, I believe, in Winnipeg and another in Vancouver, if I'm not mistaken. So I believe those were also considered as part of the model that was developed in Kingston.
Thank you. As I mentioned before, I think this is a good program to go hand in hand with our others school safety programs that we have, like school safety zones and community safety zones. I did get a sense of some form of hesitation of possibly moving forward and other schools joining this. I do understand that sometimes change is not easy for some, and because this is a change in the way people get to school, a way of thinking. But I also understand, as mentioned, there's stumbling blocks. There's the issue of insurance, volunteers, and other issues. Are there ways in which the city itself can assist in those aspects to ease some of those concerns?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so I think one way that we are addressing the concern as it relates to implementation and acceptance of the implementation of a school street is by working with our partners. So ensuring that we're working with the schools, the school boards, that we have support from Kingston Police, that we have the right pieces in place through all of the various partners that are part of the school safety panel and the school safety conversation. So this is not a city-led initiative so much as we certainly facilitate it, but we require support and buy-in from the partners and from the schools and from the users at the schools. And that is a component of what helps ensure that it is successful or more accepted when it starts. I think as it relates to ways in which the city can support, it actually speaks a little bit to your previous question about how this program was modeled off of other programs in other provinces or other countries. This is a program where the concept certainly has been implemented other places, but it's certainly for us in Kingston, we have to make sure that we can implement it in the context of the regulations and laws of Ontario and of the bylaws that the municipality has. So we, I think from the city side, have worked very hard to try and minimize any of those regulatory or other issues that may arise. We provide technical support, technical review, on-site sort of review and preparation of traffic control plans, and access to the various pieces of signage or equipment that are then made available to the programs. So I think we are, from the city side, are using the things that we are strong in. So procuring materials, providing technical support and review, managing any of those regulatory and other pieces. And then some of those other aspects, some of which came up in some of the presentations, one of the largest barriers can be insurance. And so the city has facilitated and managed the insurance aspect for the program over the last 2 years, but our partners at the school boards are looking at other ways that could be more readily or easily available or extended to school community groups. So I think it's about playing to the strengths of what each of those organizations brings. And that I would say in the implementation is what the city has been doing along with our partners.
Thank you, and look forward to seeing this program expand.
Thank you. I had a question too. It was related to, say, emergencies. I know that I've read that there's like a mechanism for emergency vehicles and city vehicles. Has there been any need for some of these things to have happened while there was one of those street closures? And if so, how well did it go? And is there, say also if there's an emergency for somebody who lives in that zone where, say, they need to go to the hospital right away, or, is there like a mechanism that works well? And was it tried during this time?
Through you, Mr. Chair or Vice Chair. So we're not aware specifically of an instance. It doesn't mean that it hasn't occurred, but we're not aware of a specific emergency scenario that has happened with the two school streets thus far. With that said, and to your question, yes, that was a very significant parameter and concern that we discussed very early on in the program to ensure that emergency access would not be compromised, and that in any scenario where emergency access was required, that volunteers are always present at the barriers so that those barriers could be moved quickly and efficiently to ensure that emergency access is maintained.
Thank you. So now we move on to comments from the public. Are there any?
So as you did speak already, but I'm going to consider you a member of the public just this once. So if you wanna come up to the mic over there, and I already know your name, so I won't have to ask you to state your name. Just state your public comment.
Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
So it doesn't have to be a question, I can just make some comments?
And you have to state your name and address too when you start.
No, not the
Oh,
address.
no.
We're not a
Just-
committee of adjustment.
Ah,
We need the
okay.
address.
Sorry? Okay. Okay, then I will have a preamble and then I'll pose a question. So I'm quite familiar with the Winston School Street context. I'm actively evaluating the Winston and the Central School Streets. That's really why they're operating, because they are part of a research project that's funded by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. And so I have plenty of data on hand, some of which has started to be analyzed, some of which is we haven't yet gotten to the point of analysis. Would you like to be informed of those results when they're available?
So that was kind of out of order. Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, as questions from the public have to be directed to the body of the report, not necessarily to the questions or comments that have been raised by a member of council during the discussion. So I will just say that. And if you have like a general comment or question that staff could potentially answer, that is in right.
Okay. Okay, I wonder if staff could answer the following question then. Following the tragic death of a young student at Mother Teresa Catholic School in the West End, I wonder if you heard from parent communities across the city with an interest in having school streets operate at those schools, or parent communities, or school principals, or staff, or any stakeholder.
I'll just answer the first question relative to sort of data, because I think I can, if you work with me. So the playbook that is part of the report in front of committee tonight is intended to sort of evolve and include additional information and data and things that are learned from the program. So this document will be informed by other implementations in the city and from elsewhere, and certainly would benefit from information provided from studies and other information. So certainly that information can come to staff, and those pieces can be incorporated in future versions of the playbook. With respect to your second question, I think perhaps Mr. Cussin can answer relative to the comments that were received after the accident at the school.
Yes, so we certainly did hear from school communities across the city, and part of the follow-up from that was the creation of the School Pedestrian Safety Working Group. That school pedestrian safety working group, if you'll recall, had come forward with 5 recommendations. And one of those recommendations was to continue and look at ways in which we can expand the school street program going forward.
Thank you. So now I'm looking for a mover and a seconder. Okay. Councillor Stephen, Councillor Tozo. All in favor? That passes. Now moving on to the next item, which is item number C, which is review of options for regulating driving instructor operations. The report of the Commissioner of Transportation and Public Works. I can have staff introduce the item.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So this information report at committee tonight has come, staff have received a concern. The city receives concerns as it relates to traffic safety, traffic operations, and other concerns in the transportation network often. And we have a process whereby we sort of look at any of those issues, understand sort of the root cause, concern, and we've got a variety of tools or ways that we can address those concerns. But tonight we're bringing forward an information report, as this concern was somewhat unique as it related to issues related to driver training schools and the drive testing program that's operated by the ministry. I'm also joined by Mr. Cusson, who sort of authored and put those pieces together as part of the research, and happy to take any questions about the report.
Any questions from the committee? Councillor Tozo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Does it have to be specific to the report? Because I'm curious, like, we have a report on, it seems, one constituent, and they had a complaint. Like, how do you pick that you're going to do a report from a constituent complaint? Because this is like, and I can't gauge here or there whether this is something that needs to be actioned, but like, how do we get there? What's the road to, how do we get to this report? Like, is it just one person who's like, I don't like this, and then we do reports? Like, history, please.
Okay, so thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So, correct. Staff will not bring a report as it relates to a single concern on a traffic matter in the vast majority of instances. This report that's for you did come at the request of the previous councillor in dealing with the matter. So we had worked through a variety of options and ways in which the concern could or could not be addressed. However, the request remained that staff investigate it further and provide a report back that council could be aware of. Given the unique nature, I think, of this instance in as it relates to the driver training programs and the program as it relates to that's operated by the Ministry of Transportation, there is some unique information in here and approaches that we don't normally take. So that is why we've put this in a report for you.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. So, this report was driven largely through the initiative of a previous councillor from a previous era, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. No, thank you. No further questions.
Any other questions? Councillor Hassan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. Question to Mr. Ian. I'm familiar with this report and the incident. I used to live on that, not on that street, but across it, on that neighborhood. We used to see a lot of the school, driving school, come from outside the Kingston, from Toronto, from Montreal, from other municipalities. They come in like a bunch of cars in the morning before the test. And because that was the test route, the instructor will take the candidate and take the test drive. So all those schools, they're not providing training on those only specifically for, because they just pick to do that. They know that is a specific route where the instructor will go, the MTO instructor will go to give them the license. So they bring a bunch of students in a couple cars and they just keep going and going around one by one. So one student is in the test, the other one is on the practice. So that's why the neighborhood used to see more car at once. So, but I never complain about it, but I left the area. So I moved to the other area. That area has the same thing, but not on my street specifically where I live, but I see that. But in the report, I see that is city don't have a mandate to make any amendment. But just one question. The city own and maintain the roads and the streets, and we have specific bylaw for our own traffic. So just for my understanding, the city cannot propose any other bylaw to change that way of for the school driving to just not drive there or pick another area, or we have no control over. Just for the information.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So that's partially correct, and I'll just clarify. So the city cannot mandate in any way the drive test routes that the drive test center operates. There have been cities in Ontario that have introduced a variety of frameworks, licensing frameworks, that do attempt to set up prohibited areas for licensed driving schools where they cannot operate. Yeah.
So I think the driving center, the testing center was not aware of it, that the schools come from other part of the towns or other side of the province. Probably they just come ahead of time to take the students on the same route so they can pass, so they don't have to come back. So did we talk to the driving center and let them know that if it's a local school, driving school taking those routes, just giving them regular practice and teaching them, that's a different story. But the point was with the applicant and from myself, the raised is, those are not the driving school to teach the driving. They just cheating, basically. They are cheating the system. They take their students first on that route and then tell them, okay, instructor gonna come through that route. So they don't have to come back from Toronto for another appointment. So in that regard, what we have done with the
through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, we can. What we have committed to do, what we have been doing and we've committed to do is, information that comes from residents or from councilors or others, so we can share back both to the MTO and we can also share it with the driving schools. There is, I think as Mr. Cusson alluded to, the driving schools also often provide their vehicle for the purposes of undertaking the test with the MTO. So there's a variety of scenarios under which a vehicle with a driver training indicator or signage on it may be appearing on city streets. And there are a variety of routes that are used for testing that sort of are across the city. The other component of it as well is all of the activities that are tested and that are completed as part of the route are permitted under the Highway Traffic Act. So completing a parallel park or a three-point turn or other pieces that are tested are all legal maneuvers that are able to be completed within the city's right-of-way and as part of the transportation network overall. But specifically back to your question, can we share that information or those observations? We certainly can.
Thank you for the information. So may I just request that send this information to the constituents and the person who complained about it and explain whatever the way you can, the best way you can to explain them. And also if you can share this information with the testing center, and then maybe they can take measure. But if the city cannot do anything, we cannot control it, then I don't know as a councillor what kind of assistance I can provide to my constituents. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, Councillor Shaves.
Deny those eyes. So I read the report, and if I understand it correctly, there's not much the city can do on this topic, on this issue, except for working with the Ministry of Transportation, which, if I read correctly, have added more routes and assigned them to different instructors, and then also working with the driving schools to basically expand where they're taking their students to other areas. Because I know they go into the Cataraqui North area as well, because I saw them quite often. It was pointed out to me last summer. So is that my understanding? That's basically the tools that we have?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so we can share and make those requests of those organizations, but certainly as we've kind of laid out, our ability to compel the MTO is not part of what would be in the city's purview. But we certainly are committed to sharing concerns. We do that on any number of matter back to the MTO, and we would do so in a similar fashion if these concerns are raised to us.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? No? All right, are there any members of the public wishing to speak?
I'm seeing no movement, Mr. Chair.
So now, there are no motions, no notices of motions, and no other business. The correspondence, I think we got a few. Yep, it was in the package. So the date of the next meeting is on August 1st, 2023 at 6 p.m. Can I get a mover and seconder for adjournment? Moved by Councillor Tozo, seconded by Councillor Stephen. Huh? I know, it's just... Okay, all in favor? Do you want to switch? Yeah, all in favor? All right, good night, everyone.